Hey guys, Jana here at the 4-H office, and today's fun 4-H project is learning how to cross stitch. Now, cross stitch is actually one of my favorite hobbies, and I learned it at a 4-H craft camp way back when I was in middle school. So, what you need to get started: a pair of scissors, a ruler, pencil, pattern. Today we're going to make a clover 4-H. You're going to need some fabric, some thread, and a needle that has a small enough eye to go through your fabric but big enough for you to thread. Now, cross stitch patterns. When you get a cross stitch pattern, you have the pattern here with a color chart or symbols and then your color chart on the other side. The chart also tells you what size material you need and how much of it. So when I say what size, Aida material, which is the most common fabric to stitch on, has a certain number of holes per inch. And as the number goes up, say 28, that's 28 holes per inch or 28 stitches per inch. Whereas if I say 14 or 11, that's 14 or 11 stitches per inch. Your stitches are bigger. Your pattern's going to be bigger. You'll need a bigger piece of fabric to stitch on as compared to the 28, 32 count stitches, which are going to be tiny little stitches, much smaller piece of fabric. Your design will be smaller. You can put any design on any size fabric as long as you have the right amount of it. And you might also have to get more thread. Cross stitch thread is actually called floss, and there are different companies that make different brands of it, and they're all numbered. That's how you can tell. Your number key, your color key, has numbers on it, and that'll tell you what number you need for that particular color. I have some here. I have a brown that has a 632 on it. I have a green that says 04. These are just random different colors that I've picked out for today's pattern. But if you were to stitch a professional made pattern, you'll want to use their color chart unless you're confident in being able to switch your colors, or you know that you want to switch them to fit whatever room or the person you're giving your cross stitch gift to. Whew, that's a lot. So to get started, what we're going to do is actually find the center of our pattern. That is how you know where to start. We want to center our picture, our stitch picture, on the fabric so that it's right in the middle. We're not off to one side or the other, and we actually have it centered so that we know we have enough fabric. So when we're stitching, we'll stitch to about maybe 2.5 inches towards the edge. Leave that as excess fabric in case you're going to frame it or stitch your picture into like a pillow or something like that. So find the center of your pattern. What you're going to do is just count where your stitches are, where your design is, and figure out how many going across and how many going up and down. So that's going to be your width and your height. And then you divide those by 2 and find the center. So on my little clover, I'm going to start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 22. So I'm 22 wide. So that means 11. So I need to count 11. But my line isn't going to run through a stitch. It's actually going to run through between 2 stitches. And that's okay. We can fold the fabric to find the center of the fabric and to make it work. So find my center. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 11. All right. Now, if you have a black pen or a highlighter, that'll work great as long as the colors are light enough so that you can see through them to see what kind of key is there, what stitches you need to make. So I found that as 11. I'm going to count my height. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 21, 22. It's 22 high as well. So, finding the center. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, make my line at 11. It doesn't show up great with pencil. I should have grabbed a marker. What I just did is I drew lines, and where the 2 lines intersect, that's the center of my design. That's where I'm going to start stitching. And when I do this on a professional pattern, I look at it and I see, okay, so that needs to be color ABC based on the symbol in the chart, and then I go over to my color chart key here to see what design or what color the designer used in that spot, and I just follow that as a guide. Now, normally you would take your ruler and measure out your fabric to what size you need. I'm actually just going to cut a small square. I know that this design will fit right on this square. And then I just simply make sure my fabric is square. Sometimes when you buy fabric, it may not be cut square, it may not be cut straight, so you just want to straighten that out. You don't want to try to find your center and you've got a crooked piece of fabric, because that's not going to look right. So this is Aida. It's a pretty stiff fabric, works really well. You can cross stitch on even weave, you can cross stitch on burlap, even linen. There's a product called waist canvas, so if you wanted to stitch like on a t-shirt or a bag or a pair of jeans, you just baste that on. It's got the grid there. You just stitch right through it, and then it's either soluble in water, or you can just start pulling out. It's very loosely woven together. You can pull out the fibers, but your design stays stitched onto your fabric. So I've folded my material in 2/4. Give it a nice crease, and the crease will actually iron out when you're done with your project. And where the two lines meet, where the point is the center of my fabric. This is where I will start stitching. So to get started, unless the directions say otherwise, you're going to cross stitch with 2 pieces of floss. Now this actually comes 6-stranded, so you're going to have to separate 2 strands out, or separate 1 strand out and just loop it to make 2, and then you have the little loop on the back to get started. I'm going to start with 2. When I learned to cross stitch, you're supposed to hold the tail, which is the little excess piece behind the fabric, stitch over it. I've changed up my style a little bit. I like to make tiny little knots that won't pull through, which is a no-no, but it works for me. You could also do the loop tail method, where you just fold your floss in half, thread your needle. This will stay through the back, and you'll just come up with your needle and thread, pull it tight, and you've got the thread looped and secured on the back. When you're starting, it's always a good idea to start with a simple pattern like our 4H clover here. Start on a fairly big piece of fabric, probably 14 count would be a nice count for you. And something that I also learned is shorter pieces of floss. Like I don't want to thread my needle 20 million times when I'm stitching, especially if I have a big area to stitch. So I typically like big pieces of floss, probably, you know, I'll go more than 12, 14 inches long. But then you're running into knots. You have a lot of extra thread. If you're not pulling tight enough, if you're not watching what you're doing, you can have some knots in the back. And I've spent some time pulling knots, or just cutting it all apart and taking it apart. So I've threaded my needle. I have my long part and I have my little tail here. I'm going to come up through the back, find my center. My first stitch is going to be with this grass green color, and I'm just going to come up from my lower left hand corner, go out my upper right, and you can stitch the opposite way. This is the way I stitch. Being a lefty, I might be backwards, but I'm in my right mind. Come down from the back, lower right hand corner, upper left. So I've started at my center. I know I need to make 4 of these stitches in a row, but my first stitch wasn't at the row itself. So what I'm actually going to do is just come over, complete a stitch, lower left, upper right, come up from the lower right and go up to the upper left. Now cross stitch might not be for everybody, but if you do like counting, you do like embroidery, if you like bright colors like I do, putting a picture together, it would work out well for you. So I'm just going to go up and do the next row. I'm actually going to do half stitch, which means I'm only going to put my 1 arm bar there, going from the lower left to the upper right. And for this color on top, I'm going to need 3. So basically cross stitch is just repeating your cross stitches. There are different stitches. There's a stitch called a half stitch. There's a stitch called the back stitch as well. So what I'm going to do is actually unthread my needle. I'll leave my design started, separate out another piece of thread. What I want to show you real quick is a half stitch. I'm actually using one piece of thread. I'm going to double over to create the loop method. Always good to have really good light. I like a natural daylight lamp over my shoulder so I can see. So my half stitch is actually just one bar. Coming through, finding my tail. Whoop. There, I have half a stitch. I have half the bar. I can do a 3/4 stitch by filling in. And your patterns, your keys show you how to use the stitches and what stitches you need. So I just do a little bit of a piece there behind it. If I'm going to back stitch is basically outlining. Usually that's one strand of thread, darker color than what you use, typically maybe black, or if you're stitching with light greens, you might have a darker green to add some detail. Just adding detail, just outlining it. And basically what you're going to do is just one stitch at a time, just do some straight lines. It might show you how to bring the stitch diagonal so that you can cut across your design to give it some roundness, some more shape to it, but basically it's just outlining. And what I learned through 4-H, and I learned this because I sent a piece to county fair and I didn't get a blue ribbon because when I was stitching, I didn't feel like making each individual tiny little back stitch, so I did like big chunks of it. Well, that didn't look quite as neat, and the judge explained that to me, that you need to do each little stitch. If you're going to spend the time doing each little cross stitch, putting it on, do each little back stitch so your whole piece is nice and neat. And then, if you decide to enter in county fair, watch out for the judge that takes it apart, because I had one piece that was really messy on the back, and I had gone from like this area up here, and I go all the way down here to do some stitching. I didn't cut and restart my thread. I just dragged it all the way across, and I stitched over it, but the back just did not look nice and neat, and I actually got points taken off my project for that. So another tip to think about. So you're just going to keep on cross stitching, following your key, changing colors, putting in the right number of stitches that your pattern says. For this activity and more activities, please look for us on Shenango County 4-H on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. Have a great day.